Those were the words Elliot Hargrove said while standing beside her mother's casket, divorce papers in his hand and another woman at his side. Sassy Rena Hargrove, the 37-year-old wife of Elliot and the silent majority shareholder of Hargrove Meridian Construction, the $480 million firm her parents had built from a single borrowed truck and a plot of land in northern Ontario, stood in the reception hall of St. Brigid's funeral home in Ottawa, still wearing her mother's amber brooch at her collar, too stunned by grief to understand the cruelty at first. Then Elliot leaned closer and said, "Your mother always kept you small. I am finally doing what she never let you do, letting you go." Juniper Ashby, the 29-year-old project coordinator and Elliot's mistress, stepped beside him in a dark blazer and a quiet smile, as though she had already rearranged the furniture in a house that was not hers. Petra Okafor, the 58-year-old chief financial officer of Hargrove Meridian, and the woman who had watched Salse grow up inside that company's earliest offices, lowered her eyes. Thomas Bray, the 44-year-old family solicitor and executor of the Renner estate, placed one hand flat against the doorframe to keep himself steady. Maeve Ashby, the 62-year-old head of site operations, and one of the few people who knew the full shape of the Renner Trust, said nothing because some moments were too ugly for words. Elliot handed Sarsi the envelope and said he needed a partner who could walk beside him at the landmark project reveal. Someone the industry would actually recognize. Sarsi did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She looked at the envelope, then at Juniper, standing close enough to touch Elliot's arm, and asked the only thing she could think to say. "You chose today." Elliot walked out through the side door of Brigid's with Juniper beside him, already tilting his head toward her, the way he used to tilt it toward Sarsi once, back when she had believed that kind of attention meant something permanent. What Elliot did not know, what he had never bothered to find out, was that the woman he left, standing beside her mother's casket, was the silent controlling owner of the construction company that had funded his entire career. Through the Renner Family Trust, Sarse held the majority stake in Hargrove Meridian Construction. Not in her public name, not in any press release. Her parents had spent 30 years protecting her that way, and Elliot had spent 7 years beside her, collecting every benefit of that protection without ever caring enough to read a single trust document. Weeks later, Elliot stood on the podium at the Carlton Heights reveal ceremony. Cameras flashed. Industry partners filled the atrium. Juniper sat in the front row like she had already moved into the future. Elliot believed he had taken cleanly. Then the projector cut to black, and instead of the tribute reel Elliot had personally approved, something else came up on the screen. Some men mistake a quiet woman for an empty room. Subscribe now and comment anchor if you believe patience is not the same as weakness. The Hargrove Meridian offices did not look like somewhere that remembered her. That was the point. Saya Serena Hargrove had not used her full name in any public-facing company document since her wedding. On internal access lists, she appeared as S. Renner, archival liaison. On visitor logs, her badge said Heritage Review Consultant, a title her father had chosen deliberately, because it sounded like someone who dealt with old photographs and didn't matter much to anyone in a hurry. The lobby scanner turned green before she touched the panel. The young security guard near the front desk glanced up, then quickly glanced away. People at Hargrove Meridian had learned not to ask too many questions about certain doors. It was 5:40 in the morning. Sarsi had driven from the funeral home to the office without going home first. Her coat still smelled like the lilies from her mother's arrangement. She pressed the elevator button for the executive floor and watched the numbers climb. Her mother, Hannah Renner, had designed the company's original logo herself, a simple anchor drawn in pencil on a napkin at a diner table in Sudbury before Hargrove Meridian was anything more than a name on a rental agreement. Her father, Gerald Renner, had framed that napkin and hung it in every office they ever occupied. The current version hung behind the main reception desk, reproduced in brushed steel and backlit like it had always been important. Sarsa looked at it for a moment before the elevator doors closed. Her phone buzzed. A message from the palliative care nurse at the Ottawa General. Her father had woken briefly and asked for water. That was all. Sarsa stared at the message and did not open it yet. If she read it too carefully right now, her hands would start shaking, and Elliot's budget presentation to the Carlton Heights investors was in less than 2 hours. The executive floor hallway was lined with framed photographs of completed builds, bridges, low-income housing projects in Thunder Bay, a community rec center in Iqaluit that her parents had taken on at cost because someone needed to. At the far end was a poster for the Carlton Heights mixed-use tower. Elliot's name appeared 3 times in the tagline. Siorse stopped in front of it. Her husband looked confident in the photograph. Jaw set, arms crossed, hard hat in hand like a prop. No one looking at that poster would know she had rewritten his financing proposal at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night because the numbers didn't hold. No one would know she had quietly redirected a board objection that would have pulled the project's municipal approval. No one would know she had approved a timeline extension through channels he didn't know existed, because the alternative was watching his biggest career moment collapse under deadlines he had promised too confidently. No one would know the company he bragged about ascending was one her parents had built by hand, and that his title existed inside a structure that answered ultimately to her. She entered the site documents room and opened his pitch deck. The first slide read, Elliot Hargrove, visionary, builder, the future of Hargrove Meridian. She stared at it for a long moment, then she deleted the line and typed, Hargrove Meridian, 40 years of building what communities actually need. Her finger hovered over the keyboard. Her parents had not built this company, so one man could put his name on the entrance before the concrete dried. The side door opened. Petra Okafor, 58, CFO of Hargrove Meridian, and the woman who had helped Gerald Renner close the company's very first bank loan, walked in with 2 coffees from the Tim Hortons on Elgin and the expression of someone who had been awake since 4. She looked at the slide and exhaled slowly. You do not have to keep doing this, Petra said. Saisa did not look up. I am not doing it for him. I am doing it for the Carlton Heights residents. Petra set a coffee beside her. Those two things are getting harder to separate. The room felt smaller than usual. Saisa looked at the deleted line on the screen for a moment longer. I loved who he was when he still wanted to build something that mattered, she said. Not something that looked like it mattered. Something that actually did. Petra did not answer, because some things a person had to feel all the way through before they could say anything useful about them. Before either woman could speak again, Thomas Bray, 44, family solicitor and executor of the Renner estate, stepped into the room. He wore his coat still buttoned, which meant he had come straight from the hospital. He carried a sealed envelope in one hand and the careful face of a man who had spent the night being useful in ways that would make someone else weep. Sarse knew before he spoke. My father, she said. Tomas's voice stayed level. Your father is still here, but your mother's condition changed before dawn. She is resting now, stably. He paused. He also asked whether you had eaten anything since yesterday afternoon. That nearly undid her, not the medical update, that small fatherly question. Tomas placed the envelope on the table. He and your mother also executed the final trust transfer documents last night, while your mother was still alert enough to sign. Full operational authority of the Renner family trust passes to you. Petra bowed her head slightly, the way people do when they understand the weight of a moment without needing it explained. Sarsa pushed the envelope back without opening it. Not today, she said. Your father wanted you ready, Tomas said. Sarsa's jaw tightened. My father wanted me protected. There is a difference. The words pulled her backward. She was 22 again, sitting on a concrete step outside her parents' first job site in Barry, eating a sandwich at noon, while her father showed her a set of architectural drawings rolled up in a rubber band. He had pointed to the signature block at the bottom of the page and said, names matter on paper, but so do the names that don't appear. The people who protect a project quietly are often the ones who make sure it gets finished. Never let anyone confuse your silence with absence. Her mother had been 3 steps away, reviewing soil reports with a subcontractor, holding a clipboard she had carried since 1987. Hannah Renner had built her authority out of competence and patience, and a particular kind of steadiness that men in site boots tended to mistake for deference until it was much too late. The main door opened. Elliot Hargrove, 41, senior project director at Hargrove Meridian and Sarsi's husband, entered with the energy of someone who had slept well and expected the morning to confirm everything he already believed about himself. Behind him came Fletcher Dane, 43, his producer contact and the man who had helped Elliot build his public profile over the past 2 years. Behind Fletcher came Darren Quill, 49, Hargrove Meridian's director of stakeholder relations, who had a private interest in elevating Elliot because Elliot's visibility was useful to Darren's own plans. Elliot didn't look at the revised slide first. He looked at Sayase. His smile thinned. Sayase. He said her name the way someone might say a word they had used too many times and grown tired of. What are you doing in here? This isn't a heritage meeting. The room shifted. Petra went still. Tomas's face hardened. Near the filing cabinets, Niall Stern, 38, Hargrove Meridian's head of digital records and access compliance, had just entered with a tablet. He was quiet and precise, and had been trusted by the Renner family since Gerald had hired him out of a records management program at Algonquin College. He heard Elliot's tone and stopped walking. Sarsa closed the folder. She could have finished it in one sentence. She could have told Elliot that this room, this project, this building, and his title all existed within a structure that she ultimately controlled. Instead, she said, "I was just leaving." Elliot turned toward the screen and absorbed the revised slide without seeming to notice anything had changed. Darren nodded at the new headline. "Excellent instinct, Elliot. That kind of language is exactly what the municipal partners respond to." Fletcher clapped Elliot on the shoulder, the face of modern Hargrove. On a side screen, a board member named Sutton Graves, 61, appeared on video from his home office. Sutton had spent 3 years quietly trying to restructure the company's governance in ways that would reduce the influence of the Renner Trust and shift authority towards senior executives. He smiled when he saw Elliot. "You may be the bridge this company has been looking for," he said, "between legacy ownership and the kind of leadership the industry actually sees." Elliot lifted his chin. Sice walked out before anyone saw the look on her face. Behind her, Niall's tablet lit up with a red flag alert. The hospital room smelled like recycled air and the particular silence that settles around sick people who have decided to stop pretending they feel better than they do. Sars arrived at the Ottawa General at 9:30. Her father was awake, sitting up slightly, his hands folded on the blanket the way he always folded them when he was thinking something through. Hannah was in the bed beside his, eyes closed, breathing steadily. They had requested adjacent rooms 6 days ago, and the hospital had arranged it because the nurses on that floor recognized a marriage that would not accept separation without a fight. Gerald Renner looked at his daughter when she came through the door and said, "Did you eat?" Sasa sat down in the chair between their beds and took his hand. "Yes," she lied. He looked at her in the way that meant he knew she was lying and had decided to let it pass. This was. Hannah opened her eyes. "Is Elliot coming?" she asked. Sasa had sent 3 messages since leaving the office. One when the duty nurse had asked if immediate family should be called in. One that said simply, "Please." Elliot had not replied to any of them. "He said he'll try," Sisa said. It was the kindest version of the truth she could manage. Gerald looked at her for a long moment. "Don't make excuses for a man who has made absence into a habit," he said very quietly, and then stopped to breathe. Sarse looked down at her phone and typed one more message. "Mum asked for you. Even an hour would matter." She held the phone and waited. Nothing. Outside the window, a light snow was beginning, the kind that fell slowly in Ottawa in late October. Barely enough to settle, but enough to change the color of the afternoon. She remembered a different Elliot for a moment. 5 years ago, before the profile pieces and the industry dinners and the way he had started looking at rooms to calculate who in them was worth talking to. He had been nervous then, and earnest, and not yet accustomed to being looked at. He had once told her, sitting at a kitchen table in her parents' house on a Sunday morning, that he didn't want to be successful in the way that made people lonely. He had meant it. She was sure he had meant it then. That was the part that made grief complicated. She wasn't just losing the marriage. She was losing the version of Elliot that had existed before the company made him feel like he deserved more than he had worked for. By early afternoon, Gerald's breathing had stabilized, and Hannah had slept through lunch. Maeve Ashby, who had arrived with tea and a silence that meant she understood more than she said, sat near the window and did not pretend the situation was fine. "I need to find Elliot," Sarse said. Maeve did not ask why. She only picked up her keys. The stakeholder preview reception was already in full swing when they arrived at the Carlton Heights site pavilion. It was a glass-walled space on the ground floor of the future tower, not yet occupied, dressed up with lighting rigs and catered tables and a scale model of the completed building in the center of the room. Elliot's name was on 3 of the display panels. Sarsa paused at the entrance. She had come from the hospital. She was wearing a dark blue coat that had been adequate for that morning and was not adequate for a reception. Her hair was down in a way that meant she hadn't thought about it. She went in anyway. Elliot was near the scale model with Fletcher and Darren, holding a drink and laughing at something with the ease of a man who had not read a single one of her messages. And then she saw Juniper. Juniper Ashby, 29, project coordinator on the Carlton Heights file, stood close enough to Elliot that the distance between them was a statement. She wore a fitted charcoal blazer and spoke close to his ear, and Elliot leaned toward her in a way that answered every question Sarse had been trying not to ask herself for 4 months. Near the press wall, a woman named Piper Selby, 27, a trade media correspondent who sometimes exchanged access for favorable coverage, held her phone at a low angle, not checking messages, documenting. Sisa saw enough. She crossed the room and reached Elliot. He turned, and for 1 second his face showed something, not guilt, but irritation, the look of a man whose evening had been interrupted by an inconvenience he thought he had arranged to avoid. "My mother asked for you," Sayasi said. Elliot glanced around the room. "I have investors here." Maeve, who had followed 2 steps behind, said, "Her parents may not make it through the week." Even Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. Juniper tipped her head to one side and said, "Some men are carrying the weight of their next chapter before anyone else is ready to understand it." Saracen looked at her, then at Elliot. He said nothing to correct that. She left without making a scene. Maeve followed her out into the night air, furious in the quiet way that was worse than shouting. "You saw that," Maeve said. Saracen nodded. Her voice had gone very flat, in the way voices do when feeling has gone somewhere internal that language can't follow. "I saw enough," she said. So when she was back at the hospital sitting in the family waiting area, Niall called her private line. His voice was careful. "I wouldn't contact you tonight unless it was important." Saracen moved to a corner of the waiting room away from the vending machines. "Tell me, there has been an access issue," Niall said. "Elliot's credentials were used after midnight last week to access restricted contract files in the Heritage Review archive. The visitor badge logged for the session was issued to Juniper Ashby. It was a daytime-only badge. Someone upgraded it after hours. Darren Quill signed the override." Sarsa closed her eyes. "This footage," Niall said. "I need you to see it before anyone else tries to clear the log." He sent the file through the secure trust channel. The first clip showed Juniper leaving the restricted floor with Elliot's lanyard around her neck. The second showed Elliot near the stairwell access door. Juniper stood in front of him. He put his hand at her waist. Then he kissed her, not quickly, not accidentally. Sarsi did not cry. She watched the clip twice because one part of her had been making excuses for months, and she needed that part to stop. Maeve stood beside her, one hand pressed over her mouth. "Are you going to say something to him?" Maeve asked. Sarsi looked through the glass at her parents' door. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight I am still someone's daughter." Gerald's hand went still in hers before dawn. Hannah followed 3 hours later. Sarah sat between the two beds for a long time after, holding the last warmth in the room and not letting go until a nurse gently said her name. Somewhere across the city, Elliot's phone stayed face down on a hotel nightstand beside Juniper's reading glasses. Some betrayals do not arrive loudly. Some of them wait until grief has no room left to stand. The snow was still falling on the morning of the funeral. Not hard, just persistent, the way Canadian weather sometimes grieved alongside people who didn't ask it to. 2 caskets rested at the front of St. Brigid's, one for Gerald, one for Hannah. Side by side, which was the only way either of them had ever been comfortable standing. Salsa sat in the front pew wearing her mother's amber brooch and her father's watch under her sleeve. The brooch felt like tenderness. The watch felt like an instruction. Tomas sat in the row behind her. Petra sat 3 seats over, upright and red-eyed but controlled, because she had known Gerald and Hannah Renner for 31 years and was not going to let grief make her inelegant at their funeral. Niall stood near the back of the nave, watching exits. Tomas had asked him to be discreet because Piper Selby had been seen outside the funeral home once already that morning. The service was done the way Hannah would have wanted, honest and not too long. The minister spoke about people who built things, real things. Things that lasted longer than the people who made them. Salsa barely heard it. She kept feeling her father's hand going still. She kept seeing her mother's breathing and then the absence of it. A door opened near the back. Elliot arrived late, which meant he had made a choice about what time was worth his attention. He wore a dark suit and the careful expression of a man attending an event he wanted credit for showing up to. Fletcher's came with him. Darren walked 2 steps behind. Then Juniper stepped in from the side entrance. She wore black, but nothing about her looked broken. Her coat was structured. Her expression was composed in the specific way that meant it had been thought about. Piper Selby lingered near the vestibule with her phone held low. Not quite recording, not quite not. Juniper did not belong in that church, and she came anyway, which meant Elliot had permitted it or arranged it, and the distinction no longer mattered to Southsea. During the committal, Elliot stood closer to Juniper than to Southsea. That distance became a fact before he said a single word. After the mourners had gone, Southsea stayed. She stood between the 2 caskets and looked at the flowers her parents' friends had brought and felt the specific silence of a room that had held people who mattered and now held only what they had left behind. Footsteps came across the stone floor. Elliot stopped beside her, but not close. His voice did not carry the register of someone in grief. It had the register of someone managing a situation. "I waited," he said, "to do this here, while things were still private." Sarse turned slowly. He held out a sealed envelope, black, the kind used for legal correspondence. For one unguarded second, some part of her still reached toward the possibility that it was a letter, something written in a difficult moment, an acknowledgement, even a late one. Then he said, "I waited because I didn't want to make things harder while your parents were still alive." The room narrowed. She opened the envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage, dated 4 days ago. 4 days ago, her father had asked whether she had eaten. 4 days ago, her mother had been asking for Elliot. 4 days ago, his phone had been face down on a hotel nightstand. "You chose today," she said. His expression moved from restrained to impatient. "Today makes sense," he said. "They're gone now. There's no one left to make me feel guilty for wanting more than this." Maeve stepped forward so fast, she nearly tripped on the stone floor. "You are doing this here, in this church?" Fletcher, standing near the door, looked at his shoes. Darren moved closer to Elliot in a way that was not accidental. Darren's plan required Elliot unencumbered, Elliot glamorous, Elliot walking into the Carlton Heights reveal with Juniper on his arm and no complicated wife in the background. Cyrus's pain was not something Darren was opposed to. It was simply inconvenient timing, which was worse. Juniper moved to stand beside Elliot, not behind him. The message was clear. She looked at Cyrus with the kind of practiced sympathy that has thought about itself in a mirror and said, "Some women are built for quiet rooms. Some men outgrow quiet rooms." Piper's phone, near the vestibule, rose a fraction of an inch. Elliot looked relieved to have the sentence said for him. "You were never built for the kind of life I'm stepping into, Sarse," he said. "I need someone beside me at the reveal who the industry actually sees. I am done pretending you fit that." Sarse looked at him, then at Juniper, then down at the two caskets and the flowers from people who had loved her parents and known exactly who they were building for. The anger didn't come first. Something else went first, quieter and older, like a door closing on a room she had kept warm for too long. She removed her wedding ring. Her hand shook once, then steadied. She held the ring in her palm instead of giving it back to him. "After today," she said, "you will never have to pretend I am standing in your way." Elliot took that for defeat. He turned toward the exit, and Juniper stepped in beside him, and together they walked out of her parents' funeral into the grey Ottawa afternoon. Fletcher followed after a pause. Darren followed without one. Piper Selby saved whatever she had recorded and walked out smiling, which was a choice she would think differently about later. Nal, standing near the stone pillar by the entrance, had been filming since the moment Elliot produced the envelope, not because he was angry, though he was, because Piper had been filming, and because truth needed a witness it could trust. Tomas stepped beside Sayase. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then he reached into his coat and brought out a second envelope, older and softer, the kind of thing that had lived in a drawer for a long time waiting to be needed. "Your father asked me to keep this," Tomas said. "He said I would know when." Sarse looked at the front of it, written in Gerald Renner's careful print. "Open when someone mistakes your patience for permission." Her knees went. Not dramatically. They simply gave, and she lowered herself to the stone floor between the two caskets and held the envelope to her chest with both hands. The brooch pressed into her sternum, the watch pressed into her wrist. For the first time that morning, she breathed like someone who had just been hit and was only now beginning to understand where. Petra came forward slowly. Her voice was low and a little unsteady and full of something that had been building for 31 years. "When you are ready," she said, "the company is waiting." Maeve looked at Petra, then at Sarsi, and understood that something much larger than a marriage had just changed its mind about staying quiet. Inside the back seat of Tomas's car, with the heat running and the cemetery gate receding behind them, Sarsi opened the envelope. The letter was written on plain paper in Gerald Renner's handwriting, which was the same handwriting that had signed every contract, every deed, every amendment to the trust since 1984. The first line read, "If someone ever uses your grief as an open door, do not let them take the house." She read it twice. Then she kept going. "My dear Sayase, we did not build this company so it could be used against you or against anyone else we built it to protect. If the man you married has been using what we built as a vehicle for his own benefit, and if he has done harm to others through it, then you are not being vindictive by correcting that. You are honoring the reason we built it in the first place. The company is a shelter, not a trophy. Guard it that way." Maeve was crying quietly in the front seat. Tomas kept his eyes on the road. Sars folded the letter and held it. Then she looked out the window at the Ottawa River below the Champlain Bridge, grey-green and moving steadily the way rivers do regardless of anything, and said, "We need to start tonight." The Hargrove Meridian building looked different at midnight, hollow in the useful way that buildings become when the people who fill them with noise go home. In a boardroom on the top floor, Petra had arranged 3 monitors, a stack of financial reports, a legal pad, and sealed evidence bags on the central table. Tomas placed a recorder beside the legal pad. Nal connected his hard drive to the screen. Maeve sat beside Sarah close enough to remind her she was not alone. Petra began. "There are expense submissions connected to the Carlton Heights file that did not survive review," she said. "Hotel accommodations on 3 separate dates billed to site development. Personal wardrobe items logged under stakeholder presentation costs, consulting invoices paid to a numbered company with no verifiable deliverables. Sias listened without interrupting. Niall laid the access trail beside the expense trail. Elliot's credentials used after hours on 4 occasions. Juniper's visitor badge upgraded without proper authorization. Darren's signature on the override requests. Camera files deleted from the restricted floor log. Recovered partial footage anyway, because deletions leave traces if you know where to look. He put 2 images on the screen. Juniper in the restricted file corridor. Darren at the access panel at 12:41 in the morning. Tomas said, "This is not a marital matter anymore. This is a breach of company protocol on multiple occasions by company personnel." Sarse nodded, and then Niall hesitated. "There is one more thing," he said. "From the site pavilion the night of the stakeholder preview. A camera in the north corner of the room. I recovered audio from it." He played the clip, the room noise of a reception, and then Elliot's voice, close to the camera, saying to Juniper, "By the time she figures out what's been going on, she'll be too buried in her parents' estate to do anything about it." No one in the boardroom spoke. Sarse sat completely still. For the first time since the funeral, her hands stopped shaking. Not from calm, from something past calm. From the place a person reaches when they stop waiting for things to be different. "Do not lead with that," she said. Tomas looked at her. She continued, "First we show what was done to the company. Then the rest explains itself." For the first time that day, Petra looked at Sarse not with pity, but with the specific quality of respect that had to be earned. Niall opened a folder and placed it on the table. The tab read, "Reveal Package, Carlton Heights Ceremony." "The company controls what plays before the presentation," Tomas said carefully. "If this is used, it must go through legal authorization, ethics committee approval, and the evidence must be limited to documented company misconduct." Sarse looked at the dark monitor. "He wanted an audience," she said. No one answered. No one needed to. 3 days later. More legal verification, more preserved logs, more statements taken carefully. And during those 3 days, Elliot gave 2 interviews and attended a charity dinner with Juniper and did not once try to reach Sarse by any method, which was its own kind of answer and also its own kind of evidence. The Carlton Heights ceremony was held in the atrium of the completed tower. Full attendance, investors, municipal partners, board members, the trade press, the mayor's office, the unions who had built the thing. Juniper sat in the front row beside a reserved placard with Elliot's name. Fletcher stood near the media section looking pleased. Darren worked the room with the controlled energy of someone who believed the next hour would confirm everything he had arranged. Elliot arrived to applause. He smiled like a man who had waited a long time to deserve exactly this. On the red carpet portion near the entrance, a journalist named Iris Maguire, 34, leaned in with a microphone and asked what this project meant to him personally. Elliot said, "It means that patience is not the same as permission. Some of us stopped asking for a seat at the table and started building the table." The word patience hung in the air for a second. That was the word Sarse's father had put on the envelope. Inside the building, near the side entrance used by vendors and administrative staff, Sarse arrived without a single camera finding her. She wore a plain dark dress, her mother's brooch, her father's watch under her sleeve. She did not look like someone walking into a ceremony. She looked like someone walking into work. Tomas was beside him, Niall to the left. Maeve closed Sarse past a wall of framed photographs in the side corridor. Builds going back to 1987. A footbridge in Sault Ste. Marie. Staff housing in Yellowknife. A community health clinic in Kenora, built at a loss, because her parents believed some things mattered regardless. Each photograph was a voice her parents had decided was worth protecting. Near the side door into the atrium, a young man stood in a suit that was slightly too large for him, holding a binder against his chest like armor. His name was Owen Carrick, 28, a junior architect whose structural drawings had formed the load-bearing logic of the Carlton Heights building's signature atrium ceiling. Elliot had credited the ceiling to himself in every interview. Owen had a drafting folder with his name and dates on it. He had tried 3 times to raise the credit issue through proper channels and been told twice by Fletcher and once by Darren to be grateful for the opportunity. Maeve had found him. Sarse looked at him. He looked back with the expression of someone deciding whether to trust a building they can't see the foundation of. "I almost didn't come," he said. "I know," Sarse said. His hands tightened on the binder. "What if they just say I'm making it up?" Sarse looked toward the atrium door, through which Elliot's voice could be heard receiving another wave of applause. "Then I will stand where my parents would have stood," she said, "beside the person whose work was taken." Owen swallowed. He nodded. It was not a brave nod. It was a decided one, which is harder. Inside the atrium, Elliot took the stage to a full room. He was good at this, she would give him that. He had always been good at the moment of arrival. It was the staying that had undone him. He spoke about vision. He spoke about what it cost to build something no one else believed in. He looked out at the audience like he was its origin point, rather than a man whose career had been quietly scaffolded by a woman he had served divorce papers to in a funeral home. Then he said, "I want to thank Juniper Ashby, who understood what ambition actually asks of a person." A murmur moved through the room. The people who knew, knew. The people who didn't felt something off in it and couldn't name it. Sarah stood in the shadow near the side wall and absorbed it. She had been absorbing things for a long time. Elliot stepped back from the podium, smiling, gesturing toward the screen for the presentation reel. The lights dimmed, the room went quiet, and instead of the tribute reel, the Hargrove Meridian corporate seal appeared on the screen. Official, unambiguous, the room held its breath. Then the first line of text appeared. Before this evening's presentation, Hargrove Meridian Construction is required to address verified conduct connected to the Carlton Heights project. Elliot's smile dissolved. Juniper straightened in her seat. Sutton Graves in the third row stopped breathing. The first document came up: hotel accommodation, billed to the Carlton Heights development account. Category, site relations, name in the guest field, Juniper Ashby. The whispers started immediately. The next document, wardrobe expenses listed under stakeholder preparation costs, a consulting invoice paid to a numbered company. The numbered company's registration traced to Piper Selby. Darren stood halfway up. "This is being presented without proper context." Niall lifted 2 fingers from the side aisle. 2 members of the security team moved in quietly, no drama, no shouting, just presence, and Darren sat back down. The screen changed. Footage. Juniper in the restricted file corridor, Darren at the access panel. Elliot's credentials used 4 times after hours in the same archive. Then a second folder opened. Credit attribution. Carlton Heights atrium ceiling. Owen's original drawings came up on the left, the final build photographs on the right. The structural logic was identical. The filing dates on Owen's drawings were 18 months before Elliot had described the ceiling design as his signature contribution in a national trade magazine. Then the emails appeared. Elliot telling Owen his drawings showed promise. Fletcher telling Darren to manage the kids' expectations. Darren's reply, give him a junior research credit and close the door. Kellen, wherever he was, wasn't visible. Some people's instinct, when evidence appears, is to leave the room. The doors were managed before that option finished occurring to anyone. Then the screen went black for 3 seconds. Then audio. The background sound of a reception. Glass and voices. Then Elliot clearly close to the microphone he hadn't known was there. By the time she figures out what's going on, she'll be too buried in her parents' estate to do anything about it. A woman in the middle rows whispered something that didn't need to be repeated. The screen went black again. Then it came back up with cemetery footage. A grey Ottawa morning. 2 caskets. Sear in a dark coat. Elliot extending a black envelope. His voice from that morning played back into the atrium. They're gone now. There's no one left to make me feel guilty for wanting more than this. No one in the room moved. Then the last slide. Hargrove Meridian Construction. Controlling entity, the Renner Family Trust. Majority owner and active chair, Sarissa Renner Hargrove. The room turned. Not all at once. Person by person. The way rooms turn when understanding has arrived and is working its way through. Elliot turned too. He found her standing near the side wall. No spotlight. No announcement. Just a woman in a plain dark dress with her mother's brooch at her collar and her father's watch hidden under her sleeve. Standing in the building her parents had designed a company to make possible. Elliot's mouth opened. He said her name. Then he said, "You own this." Sarsa walked toward the front of the room with quiet, steady steps. The audience moved aside without being asked. She stopped beside Owen. That single choice told everyone in the room what the next chapter would look like. She looked at the audience and spoke. "My parents built Hargrove Meridian to protect the people that larger interests tended to overlook. Tonight the company begins formal action to correct misconduct connected to the Carlton Heights project. This project will not be presented under false attribution. Owen Carrick is recognized as the originating architect of the atrium structure. His credit will be corrected. His compensation will be reviewed. The individuals responsible for suppressing that attribution are under formal review by outside counsel." Elliot stared at her. "You never told me," he said. "You never asked who I was," she said. "You only decided what I was worth." That landed harder than anything else that had played on the screen. Juniper stood abruptly. "He told me you were nobody," she said. Before she could stop herself, the cameras caught it. Piper Selby's phone slipped sideways in her hand. Tomas stepped forward and handed Elliot a sealed envelope. Effective immediately, Tomas said, "Your executive access is suspended pending formal investigation. Outside counsel will be in contact regarding expense recovery, credit disputes and misuse of company resources." A second envelope went to Darren, a third to Piper, a fourth to Fletcher. Each one was quiet, each one was consequential. Elliot looked at Sias again. "We can talk about this," he said. His voice had lost the register he had arrived with. Sias looked at him the way you look at something you have fully understood and are done trying to change. "You chose today," she said. The room remembered what day he had chosen it on. She turned to Owen. "Owen Carrick," she said. "Hargrove Meridian acknowledges your work as the structural and design basis for this building's signature feature. The company will correct the public record before any further coverage is published." Owen pressed his hand over his mouth. His shoulders shook once. The applause started slowly, and then it didn't. Not for Elliot. Not for the building or the project or the evening Darren had spent 3 months engineering. For a young architect who had nearly been erased, and for the woman who had refused to let erasure be the ending. Elliot stood in that sound and was ruined by the very audience he had curated. Juniper tried to leave through the east corridor and found that the journalists moved faster than she did. Darren sat in his chair with his hands folded, done pretending to manage anything. Sutton Graves looked at the screen and did not look away from it for a long time. Sawyer did not smile. This was not the kind of thing people smiled about. It was a correction. It was what happened when a shelter was threatened by someone who had mistaken its warmth for permission to take what was inside. In the weeks that followed, the formal notices became filings. The filings became reviews. The reviews became headlines, slowly, the way accountability tends to move when it has been built on evidence rather than noise. Elliot's suspension became termination, pending the outcome of the misuse of funds investigation. The Carlton Heights atrium ceiling was formally credited to Owen Carrick in every public record connected to the project. Juniper's contracts with the company were voided. Darren resigned before the board could convene a vote. Fletcher's producing arrangement was dissolved by mutual agreement that was not entirely mutual. Piper Selby lost her press access to the company, and the numbered company payment trail became part of a broader inquiry her editor was not happy about. Sutton Graves was removed from the board, and Sias, she stopped using the side entrance. The first morning she walked through the front doors of Hargrove Meridian. The lobby was quiet in the early hour. The security guard near the desk looked up. The receptionist looked up. No one said anything. They didn't need to. Some things settle into a room before the words for them arrive. She walked beneath her mother's anchor, lit from behind in brushed steel, and crossed the lobby floor. Her father had stood on 100 times in muddy boots and a hard hat, talking about what kind of company they were building. She wore her mother's brooch, her father's watch, her own name, which had always been enough. At the first board meeting, Owen sat across from her, with a revised contract in front of him. His hands were steadier now. He signed his name clearly, in a room that was built to protect it. After the meeting, Sawasi went alone to the private boardroom where the whole thing had started, weeks earlier in the dark. The main screen was off. She stood in front of it for a moment, and in the black surface she saw, briefly, the reflection of a woman in a plain coat holding a folder. The same woman who had walked into this building before sunrise, while her husband was still sleeping, and fixed his presentation because the project mattered to her. Not because of him, because of what was built into the walls of the company around her. She touched the brooch at her collar. Then she pressed her hand briefly against her father's watch. "I answered with truth," she said quietly, "to no one." The screen stayed dark, but for the first time in a long time, the dark felt like rest rather than hiding. Some men look at a quiet woman and see absence. What they are actually seeing is patience, and patience, when it has finally decided to move, does not stop to explain itself. Subscribe for more stories like this, and comment anchor if you believe that what someone builds quietly is still theirs.